Welcome to Page One, the show for writers with the reader in mind. Here's your host, Zita Christian.
Hi everybody, welcome to Page One. I'm Zita Christian. I have a real treat tonight. I'm going to introduce you to a wonderful writer and a woman who has been a friend of mine for over 25 years. Please welcome Leslie O'Grady, who writes as Leslie and as Lindsay Chase.
Yes.
Thanks for being on the show.
Oh, thank you for having me.
So I know, because we've been critiquing together for decades, I know that you have written a mystery, you have written a couple sweet, the veterinarian series romances, yes. You've written the big sweeping historicals, and you've written three of the big, what are usually termed in the publishing world as women's fiction. The big thick books that have broad canvas and hard yes. issues and don't necessarily run the traditional format for romance. And we're
right.
going to talk about those three books tonight. So give me the three titles first.
The Oath, The Vow, and Honor.
And Honor. So yes. Let's talk about each one specifically. Okay, so The Oath, that was the first one.
Yes.
The first one you wrote. Takes place turn of the century, turn
Manhattan.
of the 20th century.
Yes.
So tell me a little bit more about that, where it takes place and what the story's about.
The story is about a woman doctor who comes to New York, and she fights prejudice, and she wants to help the women in the New York tenements. And she gets involved in the birth control crusade and becomes the target of a zealot religious person, Anthony Comstock. He was the postmaster at the time. And what a postmaster has to do with birth control was that he could have women arrested for using the mails to send information about contraceptive to women. No.
You're kidding.
No, and you could be arrested and sent to prison for, I believe, 3 years. And the birth and any information about reproduction, you could send a pamphlet about medical text through the mail, and if he caught you, you could go to jail.
Well, how would he catch you? Would he open the
yes.
mail?
Oh, sure.
Oh my
definitely.
Gosh. I had no idea.
Definitely, and he had his spies out there.
So you have Catherine,
yes.
the doctor,
yes.
coming to New York.
Yep.
And so Anthony Comstock
yep.
plays a prominent role here. So I look at this book and think, okay, I know there's a beautiful romance in the story,
yes.
but there's a big issue. I mean, this
yes.
whole issue of birth control
yep.
is pretty big.
Definitely.
I also know that you've gotten over the years and continue to get a lot of fan mail about your books.
Yes.
Was the fan mail any different or something specific about the big books?
I think for the big books, I know with The Oath, I just received an email the other day from a woman who said, "The Oath changed my life. Thank you for writing it." I've received emails from women who have said, "I didn't realize women had to struggle so much to become doctors.
Yeah.
Thank you for opening my eyes." I've never really, people really haven't had a problem with the birth control issue.
Well, that's good. I'm glad to hear that. But your character, I mean, she certainly was. She was a woman ahead of her time.
Yes.
And I think that characterizes all of your heroines in one way or the other, but especially in the Lindsay Chase books. I have to say, I want us to take a look at the covers. We have actually three covers of The Oath. One of them is the cover of the book that was published by Berkeley.
Yes.
One is a cover from a foreign edition.
The Dutch edition.
The Dutch edition, which has to be so interesting there it is right there,
yes.
to see to see the book come out in a Dutch edition. You recognize the heroine on the cover because they used
what it
an
says,
image.
I have no idea.
No idea.
No idea.
But then now the books. Then originally the books were published by Berkeley.
Yes.
But now they're being re-released as electronic books.
Yes.
So who's bringing out the electronic versions?
Samhain Publishing.
Samhain Publishing,
Yes.
and they have created a new cover.
Yep.
So now you have a third cover. Now
Yes.
here's the oath in the Samhain version. Isn't that beautiful?
It's gorgeous. It's a bridge in Central Park, so you know it's New York. And then we have a syringe. And when I saw the cover with the syringe, I thought, oh, please don't think it's about a 19th century drug addict.
Oh,
It's
no,
a doctor,
no.
yes.
It's a doctor. She's a
So,
doctor. Yes.
But
Now,
they did a gorgeous job.
in the top corner, look up in the
Yes.
top corner there, it says retro.
Retro.
So this is a
whole
something
new
special?
line, the retro romance line.
So tell me about that.
Yesterday's romances for today's readers.
I love that.
And they are publishing favorite romances from the last 20, 30 years.
That means that authors out there who have a backlist,
Yes.
and it used to be that book went out of print,
Oh, it was gone.
it was gone.
The only way you could find them was in a used bookstore.
Yeah, I remember.
You
Remember we
remember
go to
we'd
the,
go
oh my
to the
gosh,
used
you have your
bookstore.
list
Yes,
and
my
keep the little
list.
book for
and
sure.
if you couldn't find it, you tore your hair out.
Yeah. Yeah, and you'd be careful if you had a good one to
Right.
lend it. Be sure you get it back.
Definitely.
But that's
definitely.
different now.
Yes, they're electronically.
So they're coming out
So
and they're
they'll-
like,
yep, they can stay on your e-reader forever and be available forever.
which is wonderful.
Sure.
Want to talk about the second book
The Vow.
in the big Lindsay Chase book,
Yes.
The Vow. So what is that book about?
Okay, the inspiration for The Vow, one day when I was coming to visit you to the critique group, I drove by these 3 mansions on a hill.
Yes.
And I'm looking at those mansions going, geez, that's really interesting. So I asked you, what are the 3 mansions? And you said, that's the Cheney silk industry.
Yeah.
And I never knew Connecticut had a silk industry. And then I started researching it, and it was just so fascinating.
Yes.
And the Cheney family was so fascinating. However, I have to say these characters are nothing like the Cheney family.
No, nothing. We
No,
want to be
we're
very, very clear about that. Yes,
It's
this is not a book
based
about the Cheneys.
on any Cheneys.
But it is
yes.
about a silk mill. It's
About
about
a
people
silk mill.
who own a silk mill.
Yes.
And this one, Leslie, just like birth control was a really a strong issue
Yes.
in the first book. This book, The Vow, also deals
With
with
adultery.
an issue, adultery. That's
Yes.
that's a big issue to have
Oh,
in a romance
definitely,
novel. Tell me how
definitely.
that plays into the story.
Well, the heroine wants her husband to love her.
Oh, yeah, well, there's a given.
Unfortunately, he loves another woman, and he's loved this woman throughout his life. She's his mistress, but he hasn't been flitting around to different women. He just happens to love another woman. And the heroine just gets very frustrated and turns to his brother.
But the heroine and this man who loves somebody else for
Yes.
reasons that they can't be together.
Yes.
That they're married, so
Yep.
he cannot possibly love her.
He married her to get land to expand his silk mill.
Oh.
I know.
So our heroine winds up falling in love with his brother.
Yes.
So you've got an issue here. There's
Definitely.
an adultery issue. That's a
Definitely.
big issue. That's a big issue. The third book,
Honor.
Honor. Now that one will be out in the summer.
That's in July, and it's about a woman lawyer in Manhattan, and as she struggles to establish a practice, because she starts out by reading contracts for circus performers and second-rate actors, and then she gets a divorce trial, and she starts to build her clientele. And she winds up defending the heroine of The Oath, who comes back from England and is arrested for sending the birth control through the mails.
Oh, so there's a tie-in here
Yes,
between
definitely.
books 1 and 3.
Between 1 and
So
3.
in the first book you've got a doctor. The second book you've got a woman who's she's running a mill.
Running a mill.
And in the third book you've got a lawyer.
Yep.
You definitely have women who are ahead of their times. So I want to know who in your life now or in the past, who would you look to as the role models for these strong women?
Well, I think what influenced me the most in college was reading The Feminine Mystique by Betty Friedan. And that was just opened my eyes to strong women. But there have been a lot of women. I can't really pinpoint any, but there have been famous actresses who have, Katharine Hepburn. And they just play by their own rules, and they're strong women. So there have been a lot of them. I can't really pinpoint anyone.
Well, I think sometimes we are, just as you were influenced by the Betty Friedan book, there were women I know when your books came out in the 90s who were influenced. I know that from your fan mail,
Yes.
and I know that because we've been critiquing together all these years. So I love to think that with the electronic versions of the books coming out, that there's be all new readers, and people, younger women, will be influenced by what these women had to go through. It's one of the things that I think is so valuable about the historical novel, and that is showing young people today, and in this case particularly women, but certainly not all women, not just women, that so much of what they might take for granted today was not.
Oh, definitely.
I mean, the
Definitely.
Comstock laws, how they were still around not that long ago.
It was, they stayed on the Connecticut books as late as 1969.
Oh my gosh.
That wasn't that long ago.
No, not at all. And that means even if they were not enforced,
Right.
but
they
it
were
still
there.
was on the
Yes,
books.
it was on the books.
So if someone sent a booklet out about Planned Parenthood,
Technically.
or something, they could be
Technically.
arrested and go to prison.
Sure, technically. I don't think anybody was that late,
No,
but it was.
But
sure.
it is a statement, though, when
Sure.
you say this was not that long ago, that this was
definitely.
something in our society. I want to talk with you about research, because these
that's
are
changed so much.
big books, and you are researching the past. And nowadays people would say, oh, well, you just go look on the internet. But you did these books prior to the easy access
I
to
lived
the
in
internet.
I lived in the Hartford Public Library, and familiarized myself with the New York Times on microfilm. So it
Remember
was,
yes,
right.
sitting down with the film and
they
rolling.
they had the New York Times since I believe it was probably the 1860s. And I remember requesting the New York Times on microfilm for 1886, and the guy in the library who was in charge of getting them said, "Do you mean 1996?" No, 1886.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it was, and then as you go through bibliographies, you see another book too that you need, and interlibrary loan was
That's
my
what we
best
did.
friend.
Yes.
Oh boy.
Yeah.
It's like, here I am again, can I get some more books through interlibrary loan? And they'd come from all over the United States, and a lot of them were really esoteric. And now you just go online.
Well, this brings me to a question, though. What was it that you were looking for in all this research that a reader would not find in, let's say, a standard textbook?
I was looking for the history, but I was also looking for attitudes. My interest in history is more social history, how people thought about different issues in their lives, how they lived, the buildings they lived in, what they wore, what they thought, this type of thing. So that was a little harder to find. You usually had to get memoirs written at the time to find it and decipher all of that.
All right, that brings a question that I always think of I thought of when I was writing my own historicals. How do you, as the writer, take a story that takes place more than 100 years ago, when society's rules and attitudes in many cases were so far different and restrictive in some ways, oppressive? How do you make that story compelling, and how to the contemporary reader, how do you make that contemporary reader identify with that character from the past?
You look for the commonality.
Like what?
Because people are all alike in certain attitudes. They love, they hate, they start wars.
Yeah.
You have
They want family.
Right. They want family. They want love, closeness.
Yeah.
This type of thing. They want to raise their children well, without, without want, and you just find the commonality, and you strike that common chord with your historical characters, and your contemporary reader will relate. They'll say, "Oh, this sounds like me."
Yeah.
I hope my husband never falls in love with another woman, and,
yes.
and I have to run the silk mill myself.
Exactly.
This type of thing.
Exactly.
Sure.
I want to focus just for a second on the cover, the original cover for The Oath, the doctor book. Now, I remember being in critique group with you.
Yes. Yes.
And reading the pages, week by week as the pages were piling up, and this was well over 400 pages. And that book, The Oath, comes out, and I remember when you brought the cover flat to critique group, and I looked at the cover, at the model they had chosen, and I remember looking and saying, "That's not the heroine." Because in my mind, I had created my own heroine for the story.
That cover is very interesting because if you notice the stethoscope on it, the stethoscope is an 1890s what they call Bell stethoscope. The stethoscope doctors use today have a little round diaphragm. I went to the Museum of Medicine and Dentistry in Hartford and asked them if I could borrow a Bell stethoscope, and I would bring it right back, and they very generously entrusted me with the stethoscope, and I took it to New York. Actually, it was a way for me to see the photo shoot for the cover. Yes, ulterior motives, but I had my little stethoscope and was there while they arranged it.
I do remember that. They were wonderful. They were wonderful people. So supportive of the research you were doing.
Definitely. Yeah. But it was important to have just the right stethoscope on the cover.
Yeah. Because some people would know, and there are readers who, especially readers of the historical fiction,
definitely.
They want to tell you.
Sure. It's amazing what people know. Yeah. But you're right. They will tell you.
They will tell you if you got the wrong one.
Definitely.
Oh yes. Leslie, at Samhain, one of the editors there, Heidi Moore, recently wrote a blog about the isolation that comes with the writing life.
Yes.
And you know it, and I know it. But let's talk a little bit about that. First, describe some of the isolation and tell us how you deal with it.
It's never really been a problem for me. I think probably growing up, I tended to be in my room a lot, either studying or writing. So it was, I've always been comfortable with the isolation. But, when you have a family, that can be a problem, carving out some time to yourself. But I also make sure I get out when I need to. And being in the critique group is invaluable because I know when the critique group doesn't meet for several weeks, by the time they do, I'm ready to climb the walls. And I suspect everybody else is too. So it's you need the company of other writers. And if you don't have it, it's get on an online community, join an online writers group, but just really make the connection with other writers, and that's a way of dealing with the isolation. But you really need the time alone to write.
Well, that's true. I mean, and that presents so much of a challenge today when publishers and the authors themselves, especially if they are publishing a book themselves, do so much of the promotion.
Yes.
So there's the expectation that you'll do this and do that and tweet and Facebook and all the miscellaneous things. It's not just what kind of book covers are you putting out anymore.
Right.
So there's so much that has to be done. And on one hand, certainly that can keep you in touch with other writers.
Definitely.
But you still need to find that balance of finding the time to write.
And it's interesting now. I was reading an article in the New York Times about how for commercial fiction, they like you to write a lot of books to put out quickly. So before,
I'd like that too.
Right, sure. Before if you got one book a year, now if you can do 2 or 3, and plus write a short story or a little novella in between everything, and A lot of writers are pulling their hair out. So,
Oh my gosh.
yeah, you need more isolation and time to write, and also promote when you're, doing your 2 and 3 books a year.
Well, let's talk a little bit about that. I think it's sort of a mundane question, and yet it's so important for people trying to figure out how to do this.
Right.
What is your writing schedule? Like, what do you do? Let's say not in the years past, because now there is the internet. You don't have to be traveling up to the library
all the time. Sure.
But I still do. There's still things I
Sure.
want in the library. But with the advent of the internet now, what is the writing life like in terms of how do you divide your time?
I try to do most of it in the afternoon
Why is that?
when my husband's not around.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So I'm able to do it then. I'll do it in the evening. Sometime I'll do it when I get up in the morning. It's whatever.
Now, I know the answer to this, but I'm going to ask anyway for the people in the audience. Do you consider yourself a writer who needs an outline?
Yes.
Or do you just,
Nope. Have to have an outline.
I do too.
I have to know where I'm going. Otherwise, I will wander and waste time and go off on tangents.
Well, plus you're talking these big books. I mean, you can't
better know
afford to
where you're
detour.
going. Yeah.
Especially if there's a time constraint involved.
Definitely.
So, do you write all the way through and then edit? Do you edit as you go along?
I edit as I go along.
I do that too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It seems to work a lot better.
All right, let's spend a few minutes talking about critique group. When you bring your pages to critique group, and let's say one week you bring 3 or 4 pages, another week you bring 15 or 20 pages. So much depends on what you're writing and what kind of time you had during the week. What are you looking for when you're having someone else read your work?
Is it well paced? Is it logical? Are the characters engaging? Are the characters well drawn?
You know what
Do you make stupid grammatical errors?
Yeah, don't we all? Yeah. But I find that when I'm writing, I know what I think is on the page.
Right.
But it isn't necessarily there.
I know. Yeah. You read it and it's like, well, I know it's happening, and
Exactly.
the rest of us don't. But yeah.
Yeah, I remember one time in particular, we were at critique group, and it was a new project I brought. It was this big scene, and I remember the group was reading everything, and then you said to me, Zita, that was really beautifully written, but where's the conflict? Yeah, I remember that. Let's talk a little bit about pseudonyms, because Leslie O'Grady, and you have written lots of books under the name Leslie O'Grady.
Yes.
But these books, you're writing as Lindsay Chase.
They were bigger books, so they suggested I take a pseudonym.
It is a slightly, in today's world with the internet, I don't know that pseudonyms make a lot of sense for a new writer today, because everything is there.
I have heard different writers say, you don't need a pseudonym. Readers are smart enough to know that if it's a mystery by Leslie O'Grady, it's not a historical by Leslie O'Grady. So why do you? So that's a whole different discussion going on. But
it wasn't that way in the 90s. It wasn't that way at all. It was, if this was a different kind of book,
right. You didn't want to
did a favor
you
to
didn't
your
want
reader.
to confuse the reader.
Yeah.
That was the thinking then. Now they say it's different, but who knows?
Now, you had a humorous mystery.
Yes, The Grateful Undead.
The Grateful Undead. And a specific character in that story.
Yes, Miranda La Fortuna.
I love that character. I love her. And I'm making a public plea right now that you find a way to bring her back.
Yes.
In either in an electronic form or in another book or something, because
there is a second book that I wrote, and the publisher who published the first one went out of business.
Yes.
So my second book languished. And if you start a series with one publisher, a new publisher a lot of times doesn't like to pick it up.
Yeah, I know.
So it looked like that was dead in the water, but that was before ebooks.
That was before, absolutely. It changes everything.
Sure.
And you're working on something entirely different.
Yep, the
now.
urban fantasy.
The urban fantasy.
Yes.
So for those in the audience who might not know what that is, tell us about urban fantasy? What is it as a genre?
An urban fantasy is, it's not quite, it's like a paranormal romance, but the emphasis is not on the romance. The emphasis is more on the fantasy elements.
Such as?
And the heroine can have more than one love interest. Mm-hmm. And sometimes the hero in one book will be killed off, and she gets a new one in the other book of the series.
But you can have, in these urban fantasies, these paranormal elements of
yes.
werewolves or
Vampires,
shapeshifters and
yep,
vampires, and that all kind of comes
yes.
under that category.
Yep.
Why do you think people are interested in that now?
I think it's really hard to figure it out, for me anyway. I don't know whether it's because it's something new and different, and everything else is people are sick to death of reading this, so let's read something else, and suddenly it's a fantasy boom, because there are different cycles. A while ago, you couldn't sell a romantic suspense to save your life.
Yeah.
And suddenly there was the romantic suspense boom. And now that has subsided a bit, and paranormal and the urban fantasy has taken its place.
And you remember for a while, angel books were everything.
Oh, yes, sure.
And then you know, they've subsided.
Sure.
And for a while, the great big family sagas
Yeah.
and the westerns.
Oh, family sagas,
and then
yes.
they kind of slipped away. Of course, I've got 3 floor-to-ceiling bookcases filled with research for western novels. I'm hoping they come back.
I remember that.
So I'm hoping they come back. So Leslie, just a time for a quick thing here. I want to go back to talking about Samhain Publishing. What has been the editorial experience for you?
Wonderful. I would put my editor against any editor I've had in a New York house. She is phenomenal.
And the when I think of the idea of an editor, you want somebody who likes your work.
Sure.
You've got to like your work, but also someone, I think, who sees the vision for you with what you can do with future things.
Definitely. And not only that, she's able to pick out the flaws, what's good, what's not so good, change this type of thing.
It's wonderful. Well, unfortunately, getting the signal, we're out of time.
Oh.
But I really appreciate your being here, and I know that next week when we meet again for Critique Group, you know, we'll talk about all this with our other Critique Group members as well.
Great.
So thank you very much.
Oh, it's been a pleasure as always.
Thanks. And I'll also say a thank you to you in the viewing audience. I love to close with the words of the fantasy writer Ursula Le Guin, who said, "There have been civilizations that did not use the wheel, but there have been no civilizations that did not tell stories. So find your story and find a way to tell it. And do join us again next time." Thank you.
Food for the crew and guests was provided by Manchester Grill of Manchester, Connecticut, and Angelo's Restaurant of Glastonbury, Connecticut. Be sure to send your writing questions and your comments on the book club selection to Zita at page 1, P.O. Box 1515, Manchester, Connecticut, 06045-1515, or send an email to Zita at page1tv.com.